We are, thank you, Lindsay, for recording that. We are working for Stantec Consulting and ultimately working for KYTC on advancing this project. My role is the environmental lead, and the Section 106 process falls under that. So kind of overseeing this meeting. I do want to recognize Trent Spurlock, and he's on the call. If you can see his name, he works for Cultural Resource Analyst and did a lot of the field work and documentation, he and his team, that we'll be talking about tonight. So the thing I want to do is start a presentation. Going to start screen 3 here. So give that a second. Make sure it comes up on your screen. I'll walk through a presentation and then we will open things up here in a little bit. The first slide I want to share is just some Zoom tips here. If you have not participated in a Zoom meeting, the best way to communicate and ask questions is through the Q&A. You can type your questions in there and we can respond to them, and that way we have a recording of that and make sure we get time to get the right response. So I hope all that's intuitive to you and all those show up on your screen. This is the meeting agenda, so to speak, our meeting objectives. First, we provide a project overview. Then I'm going to review the NEPA process, which NEPA is the overall encompassing National Environmental Policy Act. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we do have new people on the meeting tonight, so I want to provide an overview of what that looks like. And then the Section 106 process, which is Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, falls under that. Talk about the process, and then we'll talk about the eligible properties, and properties that mean eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So project representatives tonight. The overall project is ran and governed by the Federal Highway Administration. We anticipate using federal funds for this project. Kentucky Transportation Cabinet is responsible for advancing these types of projects. The Kentucky State Historic Preservation Office, which is housed in the Kentucky Heritage Council, is an important participant in the overall Section 106 process. Stantec Engineering is a lead consulting firm. We are a consultant, KK4, to Stantec, and then CRA is our historic and archaeological experts on our team. So I'm going to provide a quick project overview and just not spend too much time on that. First of all, just to make sure you're at the right meeting, we're talking about the Kentucky 8 bridge, 4th Street between Kenton and Campbell County, and here in Covington and Newport. There's a picture of it there on the screen. Just some facts about this project. And then I'm also going to ask, when I get done with this, if Mike Beazold wants to say anything about this project and its current status, as he's a project manager. But this bridge is recommended eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places itself. The bridge itself is historic. And there's two categories in which it's recommended as eligible. One is called Criterion A, Criteria A for its association with transportation and commerce. And then Criteria C as an example of a worn through truss flanked with worn deck trusses. We'll talk more about what A and C mean in a little bit, but I just want to make the point that the bridge itself is historic. It was built in 1936 and named the Veterans Memorial Bridge to honor World War I soldiers. In 1982, there was a project that moved sidewalks to the outside of the truss, which is no doubt a great project. There have been recent emergency repairs, I think in 2020. The bridge was closed for some rehab. The latest 2020 inspection that I had available to me listed the bridge in serious condition. The bridge is got some major structural problems. It's been rehabbed quite a bit, and today it carries about 17,500 vehicles. And in recent counts, we counted up to 700 pedestrians daily, which is a huge number. And as you know from living there, it is a highly utilized bridge for pedestrians and bicycles. So the purpose and need of the project here is to provide a safe, modern, efficient, multimodal, meaning vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles, crossing of the Licking River within the existing corridor. So we're looking at improving this corridor. A couple of facts about the purpose and need. One is that the current bridge has a load rating of 17 tons. And in the image to your right, you can see what that looks like. The car is about 1.5 tons, an ambulance is about 5 tons, and then a school bus is right there at 17 tons. So school buses probably technically should not be using this bridge. I know that Tank does not use this bridge, and so people are not able to enjoy public transit across this. You certainly couldn't do a fire truck with 19 to 30 ton loads, garbage trucks, of course, anything higher. So our goal and objective is to build a bridge that doesn't have any load postings. Another thing I want to point out that most of you probably know and experienced is a 4-foot wide sidewalk, which is very substandard, especially in terms of American Disabilities Act, ADA compliance. You want that a lot wider so people can get around and get past each other, including on using a wheelchair and such. So that overview, I'm going to try to see if I can unmute Mike. Hold on. I may need help here. And see if he's got any introductory comments. Hang in there.
No, I think Tom, I think you nailed it fine.
Okay,
so
good.
What the needs of the project are, and what we're looking at trying to accomplish here. It's a transportation issue, but it's also a community issue. So that's why we're meeting here, to make sure that we are meeting the community needs, not just the transportation needs. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Okay. I did want to give District 6 a chance to talk about it, since they are driving this project there in Northern Kentucky. Okay. I'm still sharing my screen, correct? You see, just project overview. There was a planning study completed in 2016. And since that time, the project has been given funding, and we are now further examining existing conditions, developing a very specific purpose and need, the objectives we want to accomplish. We're conducting environmental studies, and that is part of what we're doing tonight, conducting community outreach. There is a project webpage, and I'll talk about this a little later too, as there is a public meeting scheduled in mid-March, details to be determined. I will commit to emailing the consulting party group, the email group that I have that invited you to this meeting, to make sure you know the date and location of that. And then as part of that, obviously, we're moving into the development and evaluation of alternatives. We're not there tonight, but we will be there soon to talk about different ways to reconstruct the bridge. So look at the section 106 schedule on past and current, and then our next slide will be the future steps. So what we have been doing, and is continually ongoing, is the identification and approval of consulting parties. Other people are welcome to join us. Consulting party meeting number 1 was held on April 20, 2021, where we talked about the overall project and introduced it to the public, invited people to participate as a consulting party, talked about the area of potential effect. We touched on the historic districts and just briefly talked about those, invited you all to join. And then here we are several months later to talk about the eligibility determinations. So the next step is our public meeting in mid-March to be determined, as I just discussed. And then at that meeting, alternatives will be presented. And then we will come back to the consulting party group and talk about those alternatives and how they have an effect on the historic sites, historic districts, both. But that will be later this year. And then in a follow-up meeting in the fall of 2022, we will have another meeting to discuss mitigation of any adverse effects that we might have. All right, so now I'm going to provide a review of the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but I think it's important to know the greater context in which we're making decisions. So NEPA was passed in 1969. It requires that all projects with any federal involvement follow this law. There are 3 types of documents: categorical exclusions, environmental assessments, and then the last one is the environmental impact statement. This law requires that we engage other agencies and the public in our decision-making process. And that's what we're doing tonight. And that's what we're doing at the public meeting. NEPA is pretty comprehensive, whatever is appropriate for the project. So we'll look at the streams and the water quality, wildlife, flora, fauna, wetlands, endangered species, hazardous materials, the visual changes, air quality, noise. Read all these, but cultural, historic, that is what we're here to talk about tonight, as well as archaeology and anything else that's appropriate for the project. And the whole process is about disclosing the benefits and impacts of the project and making an informed decision. So some of the key elements are that we try to avoid impacts to resources, and those are natural environment as well as human environment resources, or minimize impacts if we can't avoid them. And if we have to make impacts, which we do, we will work to mitigate those, and then try to provide opportunities for enhancements, enhancing the community, enhancing transportation, enhancing environmental elements. So those are the types of things we try to advance during the decision-making process. So a lot of regulations or rules fall under NEPA. You can see there all of those federal and local laws. 2 key ones I just want to highlight is Section 106, National Historic Preservation Act, which is what brings us together tonight. And then Section 4 for the U.S. Department of Transportation Act. It's a little lesser known law to the public, but it also governs impacts and considerations to historic resources. All right, Section 106, that's the law that we're here to, which requires us to have consulting party invitations and consultations. So let me take some time to walk through the process, because there are new people on the line that did go through this last time, but just want to touch on all this stuff and not really camp out on it. But it is a process law that first says, do you have an undertaking, a project that could impact historic resources? And we certainly do. So then you go to that to the next phase down is information gathering, which is what we're doing tonight and have been doing over the last almost year. We want to initiate consultation. It's part of the law. That's what we did on April 2021. And then we want to consult on eligibility, and that's what we're doing today. Over to the right, you see the little image there. That's sort of a flow chart of these processes. Okay, so I circled number 2, identify historic properties, and that little blue triangle thing is when we engage consulting parties, and that's what we're doing. And as I talked about in the slide above, our next step will be to consult with this group on the effects, and then later we will consult with this group on mitigation. Okay. All right, so area of potential effect, that was one of the steps, is to define this area. This is our area of potential effect. This is the geography where you could have the proposed changes, proposed projects could affect historic resources. A couple things to say about this. Typically, we draw about a 300-foot circle or radius around the project. Look like a hot dog around the bridge project there. I would include this. But for this project, we knew there would be a lot of interest because we know we have very active historic districts and local public. So we drew a very generous area of potential effect. It's much larger than the standard offset. And we tried to make a very generous assessment of view shed. We did receive some comments from some consulting parties from our last meeting that the area of potential effect, or the APE, was not large enough. So we sought some guidance and coordination with the Kentucky SHPO's office and the Federal Highway Administration. And we are in agreement that the APE is suitable for this project. We have to draw the line somewhere. And this is a pretty generous area. Any property that touches that blue line or is inside that blue line, we will assess or have assessed. And on the next slide here, I want to show you that that's the APE in blue with historic districts in pink, orange, and yellow. If you're colorblind, I apologize. It gets pretty busy there in the middle. But what this shows is that the area potential effect overlaps the Ohio Riverside Historic District and the Licking Riverside Historic District. It comes short of touching the Covington Downtown Historic District. But where that overlaps, we've studied the resources in those historic districts in the APE. All right, so what gets listed in the National Register? Districts, like we have, sites, buildings, structures, and objects that are significant in American history, generally at least 50 years old, ballpark, retain integrity to convey meaning and importance, and meet one or more of the 4 criteria of eligibility. So people always ask, well, 50 years old, is it automatic historic? And the answer is no, it has to have some significance and integrity and meet criteria. Those criteria are identified as A, B, C, and D. A are associated with events that made significant contribution to the history of our society and the community. So, for example, on our project, the levee trail, or not trail, just the levee there on the Newport side is eligible. We're recommending it as eligible under criteria A because that levee helped define the community and help it develop and build out as a city. Likewise, the bridge itself is being recommended under criteria A because of the transportation benefit it has provided and how that has changed the communities in the area of potential effect. So criteria B are associated with people's lives. We have a number of people of significance to our history that lived in or contributed to our historic district. So we have sites that are eligible under criteria B also. Criteria C is the most common criteria for eligibility. It talks about the characteristics and types of period in the master's work and artistic value. It's like you see a historic site and he's like, that's a cool site and that would be eligible. That should be a historic resource. It's most likely eligible under C at a minimum, maybe the others also. Criteria D is usually reserved for archaeology sites, but sometimes above ground too. All right, so that's my overview. I'm going to ask Trent Spurlock here to help guide and talk through the next slides because he is our resident historian. So
can you hear me?
Yes, Trent, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm Trent Spurlock, and I'm an architectural historian with a cultural resource analyst in Lexington, Kentucky. We conducted the cultural historic survey for the project. So there's three of the resources there on the screen on that slide that we talked about in the report. The bridge itself, the 4th Street Bridge on the bottom right there, was, as Tom has mentioned, was recommended eligible under A and C. At the top is the Daniel Carter Beard House, which is actually a National Historic Landmark, and for its association with Daniel Carter Beard, who was a key figure in the movement that led to the founding of the Boy Scouts of America in 1910. And then down on the bottom left is also a individually listed in the National Register residence, and it is the Hearn House, which is listed in the National Register under Criterion B for its association with Jonathan David Hearn, and also under Criterion C as an Italianate, excellent example of an Italianate residence in downtown Covington. So, so those are three of the resources. Just an overview of the report. We surveyed a total of 77 cultural historic sites within the area of potential effects. And as Tom has mentioned, there's the Ohio Riverside Historic District, which is located northwest corner of the 4th Street Bridge. 29 sites were surveyed within the area of potential effect within the Ohio Riverside Historic District, and which is already listed in the National Register. The historic district is, and we recommended that it continues to be eligible for listing in the National Register under criteria A and C for significance to areas of art, exploration, settlement, commerce, and architecture. It kind of checks a lot of boxes. We also recommended that the period of significance be expanded for the Ohio Riverside Historic District to extend from 1815 to 1930. And there's a mix of different types of buildings within the historic district. You have residential, commercial, former hospital that is located within the historic district. So it's kind of and our report also recommended those resources within the APE of the historic districts that are contributing to the historic districts. When the historic districts were originally listed in the National Register, they only kind of pointed out certain resources in the nomination and not every resource. So in our report, we recommended whether or not resources were contributing to the historic districts or not, or non-contributing to the historic districts. And as Tom's already said, there's the Licking Riverside Historic District, which is located at the southwest portion of the bridge, or southwest of the bridge. We looked at 37 sites within the APE, within the Licking Riverside Historic District, and recommended that the period of significance for the Licking Riverside Historic District also be expanded beginning in 1800 and ending in 1930. Let's see, and I think there were some other resources that we also recommended as eligible for listing in the National Register. One of them is the Carneal House, which we recommended as eligible under Criterion B. The Carneal House is located in the Ohio Riverside Historic District. We recommended it eligible under Criterion B for its association with Laura Baker Rothier, and also under Criterion C as an excellent example of transitional Georgian architecture. We also recommended that the 4th Street Bridge was eligible, has been discussed. We also recommended that the U.S. Post Office in Newport was eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places under criterion A for its association with community planning and development, and also under criterion C for the modern style of architecture it exhibits. And then, as Tom had mentioned, we'd also recommended that the levee was eligible for listing in the National Register. That's all I have at the moment.
I apologize for jumping around there. I do have Trent's report here available, and hopefully you downloaded. People on the call downloaded this report. It is 335 pages, but it is full of good pictures and maps and a description of all the sites that Trent provided an overview of. So I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions about specific sites or the issues and the information in this report. Throw those in the chat. So I do see there's a good conversation between Christopher Myers and everyone and Mike Beazle. Some great questions about traffic during construction. And Mike pointed out in this in the chat that there's a commitment by the Transportation Cabinet to keep traffic open on the bridge during construction with the possibility of maybe some minor detours. And also to keep pedestrian access open during construction. I'm just going to share that my slide to jump to the eligibility report, and then contact information for me and Mike Beazle. This PowerPoint, a PDF of this, will be posted up on the project webpage. And then, we're here to answer questions that anybody might have about the project, or about at least this eligibility report. Let's see. Mr. Wheatley asked, can someone provide boundaries for the Ohio River Historic District and the Licking River Historic District? I sure can. Go back. Okay. Do you see on the screen the pink on the top is the Ohio Riverside Historic District, and the orange at the bottom is the Licking Riverside Historic District. And I think that's the entirety of those historic districts as they are listed. Does that answer your question?
Tom, we had another question pop in from
Okay.
Lisa. How will the historic property assessment data be used in determination of the scope of the project?
So that's an excellent question. It is always our goal to minimize or avoid any impacts to historic resources. So we do a very thorough job in identifying what those properties are and those sites are. So we're fully aware. And then as we design, we try to minimize and avoid them. And that would change the scope of the project. And that certainly guides the scope of the project. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider, structural engineering and ability for boats and navigation of Licking River, and how traffic would move and all that stuff. So we have to meet all those design objectives, but we're fully aware of what the historic resources are, and we'll take that into account on every decision. I know we want to obviously avoid any historic resources or site or houses, especially buildings within the historic districts that we can. The bridge itself is historic. Obviously, we're going to be changing that. But its historic character will help inform the decision making. That's about as good of an answer I can come up with. If anyone else wants to chime in and help answer that question, but it's certainly an important part of the decision making.
Once we finish this step and determine what is historic and what the community feels is historic, then as we're developing our alternates, we can make accommodations for that the best that we can. And then the next time that we get together, we can start looking at what the impacts to these historic resources are by the best alternates that we've been able to develop to avoid them. So like I said, so this is the starting off point of what we as a community, or you as a community, feel is historic. Then we as designers can go back and try to minimize or avoid what the community feels is the historic resources. I think that explained it.
Okay, so Lisa asked, and Mike, you may want to answer this, is the plan to widen the new bridge versus today and widen 4th Street in Covington, or will 4th Street in Covington remain the same width as today?
There is no plans by the Transportation Cabinet to widen 4th Street in Covington. Yeah, this project is just a bridge replacement or supplement, but there's no plans to do any additional widening in Covington.
But the bridge itself would be wider and have more travel lanes than today.
Yes, the bridge will be wider than it is today. Just if you've seen through the comments, we've made the commitment that we will maintain traffic and maintain pedestrian access as we're constructing the new or the supplemental bridge. So we need to build 2 lanes to maintain traffic, and then we need to rebuild the other 2 lanes. So there will be wider. Or like we were saying, the 4-foot sidewalks do not meet the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements for sidewalk width. Or there's no bicycle facilities on the existing bridge. All of those will be taken into consideration as we're developing. So that's why it will be wider when we're done, but we're not adding any additional capacity for traffic in Covington. So there's no widening of 4th Street. There's no widening of 5th Street. There's no widening of Russell or Greenup or any streets in Covington.
So Eric Buck asked, do you have preliminary design options that you can share? Is a new bridge being considered being constructed to the south of the current bridge? So the short answer to that is almost. The public meeting in just in mid-March, we'll have the options to share, and they're just not ready yet. I think, I don't speak on behalf of the engineering team, but I think it's very important that the bridge options and alternatives get signed off by a lot of different people, that they're feasible, and that at that public meeting, we can present options that are realistic.
Yeah.
We don't want to present to the public options that we don't know if we can or cannot.
Yeah, the first
deal
step
with.
was to determine what is historic. That's why we had to meet as a community first before we can really say which alternates are fully available out there. And let's see, the other question there, no widening. The odds are that it'll be something built to the south, but we have to investigate all options to the north or to the south as we're looking at this to make sure that the historic resources that are impacted are the minimized. So that's why we had to meet here first before we can make any decisions of north or south or anything on that. So this was the first step to start figuring out what alternates we will be having. Let's see. Next question. Please plan for the new bridge to have at least a 14-foot wide barrier separated shared use path that links Riverfront Commons. I can't commit to a 14-foot wide extra path. I will commit to sidewalks on both sides of the bridge, and I will commit to bike paths on this bridge. But I can't commit to a 14-foot wide barrier.
So, I'm going to ask Trent to think about this question from Scott Clark. I do have a question about the General James Taylor Memorial at the park and its ineligibility for NR listing. It is 2 years away from 50 years, well within the project timeline. The memorial is an indicator of the commitment of the community to commemorate the importance of the site. That was the key to the entire region. Trent, I don't know if you have information to speak on General James Taylor Memorial.
Not coming to mind, but we could certainly take a look at that. We tried to look at everything that was 45 years and older, that we knew was 45 years and older. So we can certainly look a little more deeply into that one.
Okay. And let's commit to providing information on that, on a potential eligibility determination. I assume it's within the APE. I'm not even exactly sure where that site is.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Scott. I'd be glad to talk to you too.
So the next question by Christopher Myers here, and Trent, you may need to respond to this too. So I appreciate the map, the leader lines and arrows that your team provided. It gives a clear view, your recommendations. There are a series of attached homes on the east side of Shelby Street in Covington along the Licking River that are within the Blue 8 boundary, but are not called out. I don't believe your belief that development is over 50 years old and would have been constructed outside the period of significance for the Ohio Riverside Historic District. I'm assuming those are these homes up here.
Yes, I think it's the ones that are just above number 3 to the northeast.
Okay.
I don't believe those are 50 years old or 45 years old.
Okay. I think that agrees with Mr. Meyer's comment. Have other comments? I don't want to cut anybody off if anyone's typing or thinking about it. But we're here for you. And, we said the meeting would go till 7:30, I think. I wasn't sure how long this meeting would last. Trent, was Site 5 reviewed outside of architectural integrity?
Yes, it had. We decided it did not retain sufficient integrity to be eligible or contributing to the historic district. I think it's also, I can't remember if the date was outside the period of significance or not, but it has had a number of alterations over the years. So that was our thinking on Site 5, was that it lacked the integrity to be eligible. Let me get down there. That's the former hospital site.
So, I will say, I'm going to jump down to the end of our presentation here. Perfect segue into the slide I was going for that Christopher asked is, thank you for your time, everyone. Who would be the best person to contact if any other concerns come up about the eligibility study? I put myself, my name, my email, my cell phone number here on the slide, and I can be the go-to person to contact, and will obviously involve Trent or Stephanie at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet Division of Environmental Analysis in Frankfurt. She's on the call, or and engage the Kentucky SHPO's office too for any questions or comments.
The last comment up there from Scott Clark: when did the impacts to the project on the Licking River, her banks, and specifically the rowing club boathouse come into play in review? That is something that we will be looking at through the public meeting. Those aren't necessarily historic features part of this committee, but those are definitely community impacts and potential project impacts that we will definitely take into consideration when we start looking at alternates and present them to the public to get public comments.
So I would like to ask if you do have comments on the eligibility report or any of the specific sites, that you get those to us within the next couple of weeks. So
One other little bit of clarification. The Tom did show a lot of criteria that we look at environmentally earlier on in the presentation. There is a lot of things in the federal documents on things that we have to look at for impacts. And most of the things have should in the when should avoid. The only place that there is a shall is under historic impacts. So that's why this committee is formed and is moving forward faster than some of the other impacts for the project, because by federal regulations, this is a shall avoid, where everything else is a should avoid. So that's why this committee has a little bit more importance and is moving forward at a little faster than any of the other things that we're looking at. If there's nothing else, I think we can call it a night, Tom. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thanks for your participation. Thanks for your input. And we really look forward to the next meeting where we start looking at what impacts alternates might have on some of these specific historic resources.
okay.
So Tom, would you remind us again when the next meeting is tentatively scheduled? Is it in March?
So yes, the next public event is the public meeting, which is going to be mid-March. I think the team's still working on identifying a location and a specific time and such. But once that is nailed down, I will email everybody that is part of this group and make sure you know that. And there will be a public blitz about it. It'll be on the webpage and other public avenues. We'll go big on that. Then following that meeting, once the alternatives have been out there for the public to consume, this group will come back together, relatively short period after that. I put summer of this year, but whenever we want, we can come back and talk about those alternatives. Probably give the chance for the public to vet everything and know what public comments we have. so that we could share that with this group too.
I might suggest that the team look at BB Riverboats that has a pavilion that's actually on the banks of the river right there at General Taylor Park, because they have a large capacity for a meeting, and also you can actually look from the facility and see the bridge.
Okay.
We'd be happy to assist with arranging that if somebody wants to contact me.
Okay, because I'm not the best at Zoom, can I ask who's talking?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Scott Clark, HPO for the city of Newport.
Okay. Well, if there are no more comments, I'm fine with wrapping up early. So he doesn't make anyone upset to wrap a meeting up early, but we are open and you can always reach out to me as far as open and transparent and the webpage and provide comments on this report. And we will respond to all those, and we will have a meeting summary of this meeting, and a PDF of this presentation will be provided also, just like the last time, up on the webpage. And I just appreciate everybody's time and involvement, helping guide us to the best decision and the best fit and all that stuff, ultimately to make this a reliable bridge. Good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, everybody have a great evening then. I can see the participant number is dropping.
Thanks, Tom.
Yep. Good job, Tom.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great meeting.
See you, Trent.